Good morning. Today on the Citizens Politics podcast, The Movement, we're joined by Michael Beaumont, National Chairperson of Action SA. He's going to be talking to us about the campaign work for the Action SA and all things controversial and happening right now. Michael, good morning.
Morning. It's good to be with you in studio here.
So, Michael, the interesting thing about Action SA is that people saw it as hope after Herman left the municipality in Joburg. His work spoke for him there, and they thought his leadership would be perfect for South Africa in terms of national, provincial, and perhaps even local government. But then there have been people saying that, but Action SA is starting to look like a DA light. What do you say about that?
Well, I just think there's no credibility. And I think the reality is Action SA is an enormous threat to our political opponents. So you have the DA running around saying we EFF or ANC light. You got the ANC and EFF running around saying we're DA light. And all we take from that is that we are a threat to the political establishment. The growth we have across all 9 provinces creates us as the only alternative at a national level in all 9 provinces to a political establishment that, if we're very fair, has failed South Africa. Yes, the ANC government has failed, and the evidence of that is all around us. But so too has an opposition that sat in Parliament for how long now and presided over the collapse of our country with no imagination and with no ambitions of being anything more than an opposition. And I think that's where Action SA's appeal is most substantial. But certainly that tag often gets thrown at us because of our association with this multi-party charter. Mm-hmm. And I think we should talk about that at some point. Mm-hmm. And we counter that by saying, we're not in this charter because we like the parties in this charter, or that we like or trust the DA. We use the lesser devil argument to say that if you accept the fact that the problem in South African government is the ANC, mm-hmm. as a political party, you have to work with others to get the ANC out and to establish an alternative. And that requires you to work with political parties you don't like and don't trust. But just like ordinary South Africans every day have to work with people in their work environment, in their neighborhoods, in their churches, that they might not like, but they work together for the good of a greater cause. So too must we. And I think our effort is to say, let Action SA be bigger in these arrangements so that that we can bring more progressive politics into the coalition governments that arise from these elections. I also think from a policy point of view, Action SA is fundamentally different from the DA. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll unpack policy a bit.
Sure.
But the DA's approach to a number of things is to say that race is no longer a construct they want to use in addressing the problems in South Africa.
Of course, yes.
We're saying you absolutely cannot do that. Race is the unjust legacy that we live with after hundreds of years of oppression. Mm-hmm. And you cannot be blind to that fact. You need to be deliberate in terms of how you address it. And there are many policy differences that I'm sure we'll get into later in this discussion, where Action SA offers a much more progressive and much different alternative to the Democratic Alliance.
Of course. The other issue has, of course, been the funding issue. People saying Action SA, like the DAs, receiving funds from the same donors. Some have said the Oppenheimers are funding the DA, funding the ANC, and also funding Action SA. What do you have to say about that?
Well, our donations are public because Action SA is one of the very few political parties that follows the Party Funding Act to the letter and ensures that South Africans can view who our donors are, because we do operate transparently and we live by the letter of the Party Funding Act. I think it would be worth discussing at some point, for what it's worth, that we appear to be alone when it comes to compliance with the Party Funding Act, because one of the things that I find quite disconcerting about this discussion in South Africa right now is people want to hone in on the donors who are openly and transparently donating to political parties. But there's no discussion going on about the donors that are illicitly funding political parties across South Africa. So that when the EFF has a 73 million rand rally at F&B Stadium and they have no disclosures the quarter before or the quarter after, that's not a topic of conversation. The topic of conversation is who is openly and legally donating and disclosing. But let's address that directly on. Yes, Action SA is privileged to have many South Africans donate to us, including, by the way, large amounts through micro donations of ordinary South Africans giving us 20 and 30 rand. Mm-hmm. But the number one rule we operate with as a party is we will never accept a strings attached donation. If a person ever says to us, I will donate to you if you do A, B, and C. The answer is thank you very much, please keep your money. And the donations we've received have never had strings attached. We operate the way we do, and donors respond to that by supporting our party. There's one more thing that needs to be said here that I think really is an important debate, is that in South Africa, political parties in parliament have very generously awarded themselves 1.3 billion rand each year in taxpayer funding. If you think about it, what this is political parties entrenching a system of incumbency in a country where voters are not in fan of incumbency. South Africans are reducing their support for political parties that have been in parliament. And yet you still have that amount of money going to keep them in parliament and keep them in government. I mean, recently at the budget speech now, the Minister of Finance has announced another 200 million rand on top of that to help political parties campaign. Political parties like Action SA that are not yet in parliament have to raise every cent ourselves. We get nothing. Even though we are bigger than 9 other political parties in the South African parliament, we get nothing. At the end of the day, I don't think the debate should be on how Action SA funds itself, given that we're complying with the law and we receive no state funding. I think we need to cast the magnifying glass on those other political parties a bit closer.
But has Herman Mashaba been inside the Oppenheimer family home to receive funds?
No, not to my knowledge. I mean, we do the fundraising together. We've met with our donors. Obviously, you can't meet donors unless you're going to sit down and have a meeting with them either virtually or at some kind of place and engage them on their support for Action SA. Very importantly, I think most donors, and I mean it goes for all donors, by the way, not just the Oppenheimers, have a philosophy of wanting to see that you are continuing along the growth agenda that you've articulated to them before. And there's certainly, to that extent, an ability that you have to account for how you have achieved as a political party, like you would when people are investing in your business or anything else. But at the end of the day, I think the one thing that our donors have responded to is that Action SA is exceeding the expectations of any person in South Africa, including those who support political parties financially. And I think that's why donors continue to support Action SA, because they recognize there's got to be an alternative to the status quo.
And maybe let's jump into campaign work. I mean, there's all these other parties. Why Action SA? If someone's sitting at home, they're thinking, why should I go for these guys? What would you give them as a reason to vote for you guys?
Sure, there's so many. But let's just deal with the political environment, right? We have a country that is in deep trouble. There is so many metrics out there that you can look at to confirm that, whether it's unemployment, crime, load shedding, corruption, it's all there. And you have a political establishment where a government of the ANC nationally and provincially in this province has let down the people in very demonstrable ways. And you've got an opposition that has failed in every way to grow and to provide an alternative. And I think ultimately that is why you have a situation where the majority of voting age South Africans have stopped voting. It's not because they don't have reasons to vote. I mean, look around us, the reasons are everywhere. There's been no one to vote for. And I think what South Africans are seeing now is that there are so many parties, you're right, they're proliferating. But there's only one new political party that voters can see that is growing, that is in all 9 provinces, that has actually weathered an election and not been consigned to the graveyard of new political parties that, you know, we have seen with Gang and Cope and everybody else before. And I think ultimately there are going to be a lot of South Africans who are going to look to Action SA and say, that makes a hell of a lot of sense to us. But on top of that, let's continue there, because you don't just want to be supported because, you know, other people are bad. You've got to talk about what's good about you. We're led by somebody who succeeded in business in South Africa. And if you look around the political environment, there's no one else who can make that claim. Unlike the president of the ANC, Herman Mashaba did not sign deals in order to become wealthy. He built a business from the ground up. It's the story of a small business success that resonates with a lot of South Africans who have never experienced a government that has opened the doors either before 1994 or after to enable their growth and enable their success. And here you've got someone who has done the opposite. He's run into the burning building by leaving business, going into politics and saying, I want more South Africans to undergo the journey that I've undertaken. On top of that, if you look around the leaders of political parties in South Africa, very few of them can refer to having a track record governing. Herman's been the mayor of Johannesburg. Johannesburg, if it were a province, would be the 5th largest province in South Africa, given its size and relative impact in the economy. And in his track record that you were referring to earlier, the impact is demonstrable. Joburg has never seen a period of growth and improvement like it was between 2016 and 2019, and even political opponents of Action SA acknowledge that fact.
In terms of your policy conference, you've had that, but there's concerns that you haven't had an elective conference, and there've been accusations by some. There may be your enemies, there may be a faction inside Action SA that basically there are undemocratic processes that are happening, and Action SA is going towards the elections without an elective conference.
It's one of those fascinating things where the people who are proponents of this argument are not members of Action SA. So the members of Action SA seem to be quite comfortable, and you have people in the ANC and EFF who appear to want to determine how Action SA operates, which is an extraordinarily strange thing. Let's be clear, the democratization of Action SA internally is a very important project. But it's a journey. You don't simply go from day 1 to day 2 and implement those changes. You implement them over time. And what we have been doing over time is increasing the extent to which decision-making structures of the party are being devolved into the provinces, into the regions, the way in which decisions are consulted upon in terms of those structures, to ensure that when we are taking decisions, we are doing so with that kind of decision-making in mind. But ultimately, we are committed in terms of our constitution that an elective conference must take place within 9 months after this national and provincial election happening on the 29th of May. It's in our constitution. But a very important part for us was to say, we're a party that started in Gauteng. If we had a national elective conference before 2025, as we were talking about now, it's going to be a Gauteng provincial conference that's going to elect national leadership, which would be very strange practice. Our constitution requires us to have branches established in 60% of the wards of South Africa for the elective conference to proceed. And we've been working, as I mentioned to you earlier, to achieve those numbers in the different provinces so that when we have that elective conference after this national and provincial election, it truly is a national conference where the voices across South Africa are being heard. And that was an important thing for us.
And then in terms of, the leadership list going into Parliament, there were controversies. I know that you've answered this perhaps in a different press conference, but there were accusations that, Action SA is having its members pay, to go to Parliament. And then there were issues of fundraising in terms of Action SA saying their members need to be able to help in the fundraising project. How would you respond to that?
I think it's strange that that's even a story. Of course, leaders of Action SA are expected to be involved in different activities within the party. And let's understand, when you're talking about a person who is a candidate to be a member of Parliament or a member of the provincial legislature, you are talking about a senior leader in the party at the end of the day. And those people are expected to embark upon all sorts of activities within our party structures, one of which is including helping to raise funds for the party. I spoke about the dynamic with you earlier, where we have to compete against parties within the political establishment who receive now 1.5 billion rand per annum in state funding. And we have to be creative and do whatever we can to make sure that our voice is heard across South Africa, because it is a big country and it is an expensive thing to take a political party offer across the very rural nature of South Africa. And that is why we need candidates to play that particular role. It's also important to recognize that when a person stands to be a member of Parliament or legislature, they are saying, I am a leader. And leaders have followers. And followers presumably support that leader because they have excellent skills and experience and virtues that they bring to leadership in such a way that when they sit down and say, I would like your help to help finance this campaign, they can raise donations. I think the important thing, having just concluded our process and actually now communicated with candidates where they are on the list yesterday, is that no person's been excluded for not raising money. It was one factor we look at, like we look at a variety of factors in terms of people's involvement in the party.
Just to bring into current news, of course, you heard this morning, AKA's killers arrested, suspects. What's Action SA's reaction to this?
Well, I mean, we welcome the arrest. It's obviously been a long time coming. And we certainly hope that his family and South Africans who were devastated by that news see justice as it relates to this particular case. I think we remain deeply concerned, however, that the South African Police Service tends to operate on a basis of high-profile cases like this. And what we really see every day is that rank-and-file South Africans who aren't celebrities do not have the same access to justice. And they battle to see that their cases are seen through. So from our point of view, it speaks to a broken criminal justice system. And we really hope that this case does see it all the way through, and that if the court finds these people guilty, they face the fullest might of the law, because it's a tragedy what was robbed of South Africans in that murder.
In terms of Action SA, is there anything new they would do about the crime issue in terms of their manifesto?
Yes, and I think it's a very exciting thing that we put on the table because, we had a very strong debate about the death penalty in Action SA. Various of us were proponents of the death penalty. I count myself amongst them, so too was Herman. But at the end of the day, the debate in the party was to say that in the most unequal country in the world, a broken criminal justice system will execute innocent poor people and let free guilty wealthy people. And we need to understand that our inequality in South Africa is probably experienced in no greater form than in access to justice. So the debate was then, if we are not going to take that approach, how can we offer South Africans a solution? And our policy says that we will amend the minimum sentencing laws of our country to say that if you commit violent crime, murder, attempted murder, rape, we lock you up and we throw away the key. And you're there for life. Life means life. You never come out to hurt another South African. And we are committed to spending fortunes to build more prisons in South Africa so that a law-abiding citizen of this country should never be killed or injured or raped by somebody who shouldn't have been out of jail in the first place. And that is a very strong position that we put forward. We also believe in the idea of hard labor, because if you have acted to injure society by committing crimes, why should you sit in prisons and not have to contribute? Right now, the prison system is such that there are people who are law-abiding South Africans living outside of prison who do not have access to meals a day, to education, to healthcare, the way that people do in prison. And our point there is to say that if you have committed crimes, you must contribute. You must be put to work, and you must be involved in the work of building more prisons and building the infrastructure so that you can help improve and fix the communities that prisoners have been so instrumental in breaking.
Another topical issue is the land issue. It's going to be quite important in this year's elections for the EFF, for the ANC, the DA, perhaps yourselves even. We know the IFP is also quite interested in this question of native land. But what is Action SA's position on land in South Africa?
Well, we do believe in Section 25 of the Constitution. We do not believe it is wise to change Section 25 of the Constitution for two reasons. The first reason is all around the world we have seen the impact of countries that bring into question the security of land tenure. And what it really means is that the individuals who are to bring in the investment into your country, that runs your economy and creates jobs, etc., are going to look at their investments and say, I can't be assured that the investment I'm making into this country will not be damaged by a security of land tenure that gets taken away from me and I can't operate my business because I'm investing long term. And I think that example has been seen all around the world in countries that have demonstrated hyperinflation and massive economic problems like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. But at the same time, we are convinced the state has a very important role to play and that injustices of the past are not going to fix themselves. They need a government to play an active role. Market forces aren't going to fix this alone. And actually, that's where we make the case that land redistribution and even expropriation can take place within the existing constitutional framework. And let me give you an interesting idea, because everyone talks about land within the context of rural areas. Of
course.
But people are moving to the cities. If you look at the statistics about what percentage of South Africans are expected to be living in our cities by 2030, I think it's nearly 70%. So actually urban land is becoming a very important question. And then you take a look at what Herman Mashaba did in the city of Johannesburg. He went to all of these bad and hijacked and derelict buildings where the owners have gone or their building has been taken over by criminal syndicates or all manner of things. And he took those buildings to the courts and said, award these buildings to me, and I will create value out of these things by giving them to the private sector and creating low-cost, affordable accommodation. And that project saw nearly 185 buildings awarded, generating 22 billion rands worth of investment, 12,000 permanent jobs, and 14,000 affordable accommodation units in the inner city of Joburg, in a city where people are spending 45% of their household income catching multiple taxis from Orange Farm to look for work opportunities in the city. And that model needs to be replicated within the existing constitutional framework, because I think the failure of our government on land has not been because of a lack of constitutional ability. It's been because of a lack of will to do what's necessary to redistribute land in our country.
Michael, on to this now. The issue of posters. Political parties have issues with posters. Sarah accusing Rise of taking down their posters. Julius Malema accusing political parties with, lots of posters as to having been funded by Western countries or influential people with money. How's Action SA doing with the poster campaign?
Very well. We have over 1 million posters that are now hitting the streets of South Africa. I stand to be corrected, but Action SA's posters are the first election posters. I'm not talking about registration posters. I'm talking about election posters up on the polls. And I think what we're seeing now, which certainly warms my heart as a campaign manager, is I'm watching those posters go up in rural Limpopo, KZN, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, all 9 provinces. This is not a party in Gauteng. It's not a party in cities. It is a party across South Africa. And I'm watching volunteers putting those posters up with a great deal of pride every single day. It's something that we take great pride in. Our slogan is something that we stand behind with a great deal of excitement. Only action can fix South Africa. And I think that's largely because we need to understand that South Africans are not powerless people. I've seen posters that talk about, rescue South Africa, rescue South Africans. South Africans aren't powerless people. They're not weak. They're strong. There are people who can believe if we come together for a cause together. And it is our view that Action SA can play the role of uniting South Africans. And that's why we say action can fix South Africa. And of course, we know that so many South Africans believe that that action will best come from Action SA, because we are the party that says less talk and more action. And we are the party led by somebody who's demonstrated that philosophy in government.
Guys, you're still sitting with the Citizens podcast, the political podcast. Click, like, share, and follow us. Michael, now on to this. The municipalities. Action SA seems to be doing well in Ekurhuleni and in Joburg. What do you think about the kind of work that your caucus leaders are doing in these municipalities?
Well, I certainly think we are doing good work, but I need to clarify one thing, because I don't think Action SA should talk about good work we're doing without the context of coalitions at local government having been a disaster. They really have not been models of good governance, and I think the residents in these Gauteng metros have every reason to be very concerned about their local government experience. If you look at where Ekurhuleni is now in Johannesburg under ANC and EFF coalitions led by one-seat parties that really ought not to be leading anything, things really are falling apart and not looking good. At the same time, we have voiced numerous concerns about the coalition in Tshwane and the way that has been run, and very serious problems we've had to flag very publicly in the past. And in many ways, Action SA is the one saying to South Africans, and certainly will be tomorrow in the announcement of our Gauteng Premier candidate, that perhaps it's time to look for a third way. We've seen coalitions led by yellow. We've seen coalitions led by blue. Maybe it's time to see green, because green is going to have the ability to provide greater stability and maturity to coalitions that has been absent ever since. But certainly as it relates to Ekurhuleni, is a major concern about the government that has presided over that collapse in Ekurhuleni. The fact that the Auditor General's report has been handled in the way that it is, and the fact that so much is being hidden from council, much less the residents, about that city, is compounded by communities that are becoming dump sites. Service delivery has ground to a halt. And really, I think we are seeing a collapse of that municipality, which is precisely why our Kuruleni caucus leader, Tianda Makobo, has done such good work to fight this particular issue. And we ourselves will be bringing a motion of no confidence there tomorrow so that we can hold that government to account and see if they can be removed.
And what's happening in Joburg? I mean, the GLU is still in charge. We still have a proxy mayor in Johannesburg. What's the movement from Action SA in Joburg?
Well, it's been disappointing. There have been no fewer than 4 efforts to take back the city of Johannesburg. And I don't say take back because, it's ours or we're entitled to it, but to take control of the city and put it on the right path. And on every one of those occasions, the Patriotic Alliance, who, don't get me wrong, there are issues in terms of how they've been in coalitions, have been at the table saying, let's restore the coalition that we once had. And it's been the DA on so many occasions that have said no, they're not willing to do it. The last occasion was so strange in particular because we were the ones that turned around and said, look, we respect proportionality. If you say you're not willing to lead such an arrangement, that's your decision. We think it's very odd, and we think you're letting down the people who voted for you, but that's your business and not ours. But then why don't you support another party in this group so that we can take back the city and fix the things that you yourself are complaining about? Because you've got this bizarre dynamic where the DA is running to court to remove the city manager, and to fight this and fight that. But when it comes time to do what you need to do to actually put in place a government that can actually fix these issues, not available. Just getting voicemail. And it's a very, very unfortunate dynamic because basically the residents of Joburg, have been failed in that particular way. I mean, it even came down to this motion to dissolve council that they brought. We brought a motion of no confidence. They brought a motion to dissolve. Now, a motion of no confidence requires a basic majority, 50% plus one. A motion to dissolve the council requires a 2/3 majority. They didn't even get their own councillors. Not all of them voted for the motion. It's a farce. I mean, they went into that council meeting. They hadn't even canvassed the support of their former coalition partners. So the DA is doing something in Joburg which makes no sense to us. It makes no sense to their voters. And I think they're going to have a hard time justifying why those people who voted for them, their votes haven't actually been wasted in 2021.
Well, they've obviously expressed concern that they've been in bed with the PA before, and the PA has disappointed them before.
Sure.
Do you think they're unjustified in perhaps refusing to work with the PA?
I mentioned to you earlier there have been issues with the PA because I don't want to be unfair in my assessment. I mean, to say that the PA is a perfect and easy coalition partner would be foolish. But I mean, what I have a problem with the DA's argument, and this is, where does the residents of Joburg feature in their argument? Because it's about what they're willing to do, what I'm comfortable with. You've let me down. You've betrayed me. This is just a debate about political parties and what they're willing to do. The residents of Joburg are just left out in the cold in this debate with the way the DA rationalizes their decision. And let me give you the most explicit example. If this was about the residents of Joburg, surely the DA would come to the conclusion that the PA in an ANC and EFF coalition is much worse for the residents of Joburg than the PA in a coalition with the rest of us.
Of course.
But it does not appear like the residents of Joburg feature in their argument. And that is why I say I think ultimately the residents of Joburg are going to find an outlet to voice their displeasure about how they have been mistreated and how the people who voted for the DA may well have had their votes wasted.
And tomorrow, Michael, which is Thursday, you guys are announcing your candidate list. I don't know, do you want to give us a sneak peek into what is on that list and what is going on with the list? Are you giving us good candidates who can lead this country?
So a couple of things. Tomorrow we're announcing our premier candidate, who is number 1 on the list. The actual list itself will be announced in the next couple of weeks. And I'll get to that in a moment because we've got a very, very exciting list. But as it relates to tomorrow's announcement, I obviously don't want to make that announcement before we get there. What I can tell you is this. Action SA has premier candidates in all 9 provinces, but we need to understand that in Gauteng, there's a very strong possibility that we will have a premier. If you look at the numbers, in the last election in 2021, Action SA only contested 3 of the 10 municipalities in Gauteng. And despite that, we got 12% support. The next biggest party in our coalition arrangement was the DA. They got 18% support. We're now contesting the entire province, not just those 3 places, and we are growing, and we're growing very aggressively. There's a very strong possibility that we can have an arrangement that is led by Action SA in Gauteng. And we will be going out to the people of this province to say, put us in charge, empower us, because ultimately, people who express discontent with coalition governments must understand that they have the power to make us bigger and make another party smaller. And if they believe that it's time to explore a third way, then they need to make us the biggest party in that arrangement. The second thing I'll tell you is that the person, and I must be very careful with my pronouns now, who's going to be announced is someone with a very strong track record in government. Because for us, it's not just about saying that a person is a good candidate. There are people who can be very strong candidates who can't govern to save their lives. We're talking about someone who's going to govern. Because at the end of the day, the work of governing is not the work of singing and dancing and winning votes.
Yeah.
The work of governing is about managing complex governance arrangements and coalition. It's about changing government departments. It's about appreciating that you're walking into a place that has been governed by one political party for so long that the line between party and state has been eroded. And for you to turn things around, you've got to get tens of thousands of people to undergo a change dynamic, a change project, a change management exercise. And we believe we have the right candidate for that particular process. As it relates to our lists, and I'm sorry, you introduced the subject, and it's a passionate subject for us. We have our manifesto launch on the 23rd of March. It's going to be at the Ellis Park Indoor Arena. And we are going to be announcing a set of likely to be elected candidates from that list who, in our opinion, are going to make up a shadow cabinet. And it is exciting, and it is properly exciting. And the reason I say that is because not only do we have a rank and file member of Action SA that astonishes me. Now, I'm talking about, you're interviewing as a panel, and I sat through days and days of interviews, and you're meeting members of the party you've never met before. And these are people who are nuclear physicists, who are working on the President's Advisory Board on energy. And this is some of the talent that Action SA has organically produced. There's an enormous amount of talent in our country. And we are going to be the vehicle that brings that talent into a place where talent has never been. And that's the old age home of the South African Parliament. I think what's going to be exciting is when Herman Mashaba is able to say, here's my Minister of Health. This person's a doctor. Here's my Minister of Education. This person's a teacher. And you can actually lay out not career politicians who talk and do nothing, but people who know what is wrong with the industries and know how to fix it.
And perhaps as we move to a close, Michael, Action SA and an ANC coalition, what do you think about that? I know in the past, Herman Mashaba was quite critical of going to bed with the ANC for obvious reasons. But now we're moving to a space of politics of pragmatism instead of idealism. What do you think about that?
I think from our point of view, we believe in the politics of pragmatism. We actually say in Action SA that the most important ism going forward is not going to be, communism and capitalism and socialism. It's going to become pragmatism as we make coalitions work. But we actually believe pragmatically you cannot govern with the ANC. And we're going to go into this election and we are going to say to the South African people that you can take it to the bank. Action SA will never govern with the ANC. And there's a very important reason why we're going to do that. The first is because we fundamentally believe you can't fix South Africa in partnership with the party that has broken South Africa. The problems of ANC governance are such that you cannot fix education with the ANC in charge, given their relationship with SATU. You cannot fix the economy with the tripartite alliance where COSATU has a veto right over our economic policy. And you cannot fix any number of the challenges, including load shedding, with a party that has refused to implement the tough reforms that were necessary all those years ago for us to have stable energy today. We believe the ANC is the problem, and the ANC cannot therefore be part of the solution. We can't govern with them. I mean, let's talk practically for a second, right? we're going to stand in this election and say we're going to fight corruption. How do you fight corruption in a coalition with the ANC? What will happen is the next time the pala dollars are found under somebody's furniture, a motion of no confidence will be brought to Parliament, and whoever's in coalition with the ANC is going to be raising their hands to defend the indefensible. And in that moment, their party will die. Action SA will be the party bringing that motion. We won't be the ones defending it. But in addition to that, I think we must also be clear that the reason we are going to state this outright at the front of the election is there are parties who are kind of 50-50 on this message. There are parties who've mooted the idea of coalitions with the ANC or grand coalitions with the ANC, or the EFF saying they might go into coalition if it's Paul Mashatile and not Cyril Ramaphosa. And I think South Africans must punish any political party that has that kind of equivocation on the question of coalition, because those parties cannot go around in this election campaign campaigning around change and then go into government with the very party from which they said we need a change. And we need to be strong about that.
Sure. Michael, thank you so much. Guys, thank you for joining us on The Movement, the podcast, political podcast with the Citizen. We had Michael Beaumont, National Chairperson of Action SA. Thank you.